He shouldn't like to go to school now because he hurts so much that he shouldn't like to school.
But you injected Dicano down there, didn't you, once?
Yeah, but that's different. Even Diagon was different from Ritalin.
Ritalin's worse, is it?
Yeah, if it's not been filtered.
And also, she injected into an artery as well.
Yeah. That's what caused the trouble.
Hello. Yine bir نوشته چی شد؟
دادش؟
تا نشونش بدم نه این رو.
میگه وقتی اکس ری داشته باشین جواب عکس رو داشته باشین خوشحال‌تر میشین.
A Monday morning in a London surgery. Life here means social deprivation, poor housing, overcrowding, high-cost premises, traffic congestion, and parking restrictions. These are the problems of our inner cities.
In this area, the patients tend to be more difficult. They have social problems such as elderly living alone, lone parent families and the like, which means that they are more difficult for doctors to take on. They're a greater workload. The normal strategy is to take relatively smaller number of NHS patients to lighten the workload a little and to increase their income to compensate for the extra expenses by having relatively small NHS list sizes and doing non-NHS work. And one of the problems for the patients is that they find great difficulties in getting onto the doctor's lists, even though the list sizes are on average smaller. And you might find some parts of East Marylebone, for instance, where there are 19 doctors in one road, and very, very few of them will accept an NHS patient.
Wendy Moffat lives 500 yards away.
Well, living in the centre of London by Selfridges on the south side of Oxford Street, it's pretty horrendous trying to get a National Health doctor. They won't take you on. You either live on the wrong side, you're too far away. So I got this list from the post office and started to systematically ring through 20 telephone calls. But each time I was told the same thing. Their lists were closed. Try again in 18 months. And, I mean, you just don't know when you're going to need a doctor. They're all trained on public money. And then when you want a National Health doctor, you can't get one.
It's easy to sympathise with Wendy Moffat, but what of the doctors in the area who have larger than average list sizes with constant demands from new patients?
I think a policy which is reasonable is if a doctor or practices define a certain area, their policy might be that they would accept everyone within a certain patch. That if you go to this particular patch, the FPC will know doctors who will accept patients. And this makes life very much easier for people, for the Family Practitioner Committee, for instance.
Is it this easy? What problems could arise with geographical boundaries? How can a practice team negotiate a workable policy for taking on new patients? In recent years, publications have drawn attention to the geographical variations in problems dealt with by primary care services. Dr. Brian Jarman has worked on several of these reports.
There seems to be a collection of patients in the inner city areas who cause greater workload or pressure on the services of GPs. And the types of groups of patients that were mentioned, I usually put them into about 4 different groups. There's a higher concentration of elderly people living alone. There are immigrant groups. There is the highly mobile population. And also there are rather more working class people. To take each group at a time, the elderly people, particularly when they're not supported, living little, often very poor accommodation, and there are increasing numbers of people over 85 in particular in this country, cause a great demand on your services. In inner city areas it means more visiting, difficulty with traffic and parking, and they tend not to have their families to look after them. Taking the immigrant groups, some, such as the West Indians, the Caribbeans, don't seem to make particularly higher demands. They speak English and they seem to be under-demanding. But there are other groups, Asians, particularly those who have differences of culture and language, who do make higher demands on GP services. It's difficult providing family planning, for instance, for Bangladeshi people, women in this area, and we have a high proportion. Our baby clinic is a sea of saris and absolute chaos. But certainly that's a second group. A third group are the highly mobile population. For GPs, there's all the question of registration of patients, all the administrative work you have to do. But in addition, they include the people with psychiatric illnesses, usually the homeless, the rootless, the alcoholics, the drug addicts, narcotics, and so on. And it's often with this particular group of patients you really need to have their past history, which are often pretty horrendous. A fourth group are the working class, which, as you know, have a slightly higher incidence of physical illnesses. But it isn't very great, and this is a relatively less important group. They have an increased incidence of infant mortality and deaths related to smoking-related diseases, chronic bronchitis and carcinoma of the bronchus. But it isn't really physical illnesses that make a big difference. The only real death rate that differs a great deal throughout the different areas in the country, really, I think, is the suicide death rate. Now, to get an idea whether our evidence applied nationally, we sent a questionnaire to 1 in 10 of all GPs throughout the United Kingdom. We got a 78% response, which is pretty good. And the interesting thing was that there was an enormous degree of consistency about the problems, the particular social factors which GPs thought were important. Even writing from the Western Isles of Scotland or wherever it was, they would say, they might say we don't have all that many problems, but when there are a lot of lone parent families, elderly people living alone and the like, these are the particular types of patients which give us most problems.
It isn't the nature of the patients, their diseases or their social problems that makes inner city practice so challenging. It's the concentration of all of these in areas of poor services and poor housing. In the next 4 chapters of this programme, we'll take a closer look at a mobile population, living alone, social class and ethnic groups, to see how one particular practice has come to terms with the problems of the inner cities. The problems of providing primary care for the population of London are acute. Doctors are older than average, have fewer primary care teams, and no extra doctors are allowed into the area to help out. 200 miles away in Liverpool, there are similar problems, but there are contrasting patterns of community care. Dr. Cyril Taylor has been practicing in this area for 30 years.
I'm sure that the problems in the inner cities are very much the same, but of course there'll be differences. I should imagine the problem in London of the single-handed elderly general practitioner is probably much more of a problem than it is in this city, where it's bad enough. More than 20% of our GPs are single-handed, more than 50% of our GPs are over the age of 55. Amongst the many problems that we particularly face here are the problems of young single-parent families, and certainly 1 in 4 of the families on our list are single-parent, which is twice the national average. And then we have the tremendous problems that arise out of a mobile population.
How do you serve the health needs of a population that's always on the move? Records are difficult to maintain, it's hard to establish relationships, and programs for preventive medicine are particularly difficult. The staff at Prince's Park Health Centre see a mobile population as an everyday challenge, not simply as a matter of statistics. Dr. Taylor assesses the magnitude of the problem.
The turnover in this practice is very high. About 1,000 patients, new patients, per year register with this practice, and round about 700 or so go off the list in the course of that year. And that kind of turnover creates an enormous amount of work at almost every level in the practice.
Extra work is created for the staff where people frequently change address. The problem is not a clerical one, it's a human one. Can the practice adapt itself to help these people? What is the size of the problem? What proportion of your own population moves house in the year? If you have these figures, how could you use them? The Jones family have moved 4 times in the past 2 years. Mrs. Jones has been a battered wife. Kevin, the 4.5-year-old, appears to be emotionally disturbed and is hyperactive. Tracy, who is not yet 3, is as yet unaffected by the family's predicament. Mrs. Jones has recently asked to be placed on the list of Princes Park Health Centre. The receptionist takes an opportunity to inform Dr. Taylor of some of the details.
They've just moved into the area from Netherley.
Yes.
They're just round the corner.
Yes.
They seemed a bit lost.
Did she?
Yes. Well, as you can see back, she looks as if she needs a mother herself.
Yes, she's very young.
Clearly, there are problems ahead. Problems about anticipatory care. Problems about records and administration. About healthcare utilisation. About networks of social support. This practice has established a policy for patients like Mrs. Jones. Records are sought quickly, and members of the team are asked to visit as soon as possible.
What we'll do is we'll get Marcia, our health visitor, to visit because they're living on her territory.
Yeah. We're going to see a young single girl this morning. She's 20 years old and had her first baby at the age of 16. She started off living with her parents, but obviously things didn't work out there, so she moved to live with her sister in overcrowded accommodation. But she didn't stay there very long, and then she moved on. The father of the babies is a married man with his own family, and he's known to be violent. And this is the reason why she moved on from her sister's home into the battered wives hostel. And she stayed there for some time, and then through one of the housing trusts, she got herself a little house that we're going to see now.
During this first visit, the health visitor makes preliminary inquiries about the family's welfare.
Your own little place here. How are you finding it by yourself?
I like it by myself.
You're all right?
Yeah, it's great.
And how are the children?
They're fine. They're a lot better off than what they was at home.
Yes. I also wanted to have a word about the immunisations. Have they had them all, or where are they up to with them?
Well, the little boy's had his at home, and the little girl's had 2 since she's been up here. She's got to have the last one.
She's still got to have one
Yeah.
more, has she? Oh, that's fine. Now, what do you do with them during the day?
They go to a nursery school now in the battered wives hostel.
Yes.
They go to a nursery school underneath.
Because of her past experience, Marcia Ramsden has the foresight to look for other information.
If you don't mind, could I ask you, could I have an address from you, a contact address, either your mum's or your sister's or somewhere where you normally are?
Yeah, my mum's would be the best.
Now, where does she live?
Skelmersdale.
There are many things to be done in the consultation, but there needs to be a practice policy.
I'm one of 2 health visitors connected with this practice. We divide the practice geographically because we find that's better. We did try with names, A to M and M to Z, but that didn't work out because people change their names quite often, so we do it this way.
The sort of tools we employ in this practice, which I think are now fairly commonplace, for example, we have our age-sex register. Our health visitors keep certain at-risk registers. But again, those don't really begin to be effective until we've caught up with the patients and learned something about them.
The exciting things, like for example, we have got an outreach programme for cervical cancer screening, which in fact is working very well, and it takes a lot of effort. And then if we send out letters to women, very often they don't come, or they might come 6 months later, or the nurse might have to visit or ring up if they've got a telephone, which of course they don't often. And she might have to go back 2 or 3 times. But when we At the end of a year, when we look at those women that we've actually screened, we get something like 80 to 90% attendance rate one way or the other, which is extremely good.
Screening programs with support teams help to serve the patient. What else is there?
Well, we do have the immunisation schedule on computer records in Liverpool, and we do try to follow them up through there by getting the computer to have a printout, and that's sent to other health visitors where they might be residing, so at least they can follow them up from there. But it is a very difficult problem, and some children arrive at school and never have any immunisations at all.
More than immunisation programs are disturbed by patients constantly moving house. The stability of whole families may be affected. This hostel for battered wives in Liverpool is just one of the many agencies that can be called upon. Rita Walker is the manager of the Women and Children's Aid Centre in Liverpool.
I personally recognise the doctors don't necessarily have the time to deal with the very many personal problems that their patients may have. But I do feel very critical when in fact they make no effort whatsoever to find out what services are available and refer people to those services. Because there are in the city a great many agencies who could give the help, and a referral from the doctor could, make a great difference to that particular family.
Dr. Taylor upholds this view.
The more non-medical people with an understanding of medical needs and medical care needs that we can involve in this kind of care plan, then the better, because we'll never get the sort of healthcare system that I think we should have simply with paid professionals. People themselves have to be involved.